Hi, I'm Peter Manson. I've had 30 years experience with working with farmers on steep hill country, and in particular looking at how to plant trees to control erosion on their farms. Today I'd like to talk to you about how to place your poles for best effect for erosion control in gullies, on the steeper erosion faces, and between the north and south aspects and how they may differ for how you place your poles. Here we are on the Wairarapa, and right behind me is a hill country face. It is a south facing slope. The lower part of it is easy rolling. You can see gullies moving up through the face, and at the very top there's definitely some erosion occurring. So what we want to achieve here is soil conservation so that we can give good protection to the farmer's soil, which is his main engine to run his farm, and we're wanting to reduce the amount of sediment coming down the waterways as well. So to do that, you can see that he's already made a good start on his pole planting. His next step will be to plant further up the slope, and you can see that some of those areas still need to be planted. Fortunately, being south facing, there's a good moisture regime in the soil, and he can go quite high up the slope for good effect. Behind me is a low angle slope that might look innocuous enough, but in fact if you look closely you'll see that there's a slip. So that slip has come from an area which is very highly productive farmland, and we want to protect that for the long term for productive use. So we can plant that at a very wide spacing, which doesn't affect the pasture growth but can still give us protection for farm production. In contrast, this is a north face behind me, and it's much steeper, drier, and with more severe erosion. So one of the key things we have to remember here is firstly that we have to plant more hardier varieties, and secondly we can't plant as far up the slope as we could on that south face. When we're talking about pole spacing, it's easy to remember that the worse the erosion, the tighter the spacing. So for that north face we looked at, we would probably plant around about 8 to 10 metres apart. On the south facing areas, where the erosion's not quite so bad and you've got more moisture, they can be 12 to 15 metres apart. And on that uneroded face where there's some potential for erosion, they can be up to 20 metres apart. There's a simple difference between poplars and willows. Poplars are much better for hill country planting because they have a single main stem and they're a better formed tree than willows. So therefore they will live longer and do the job better long term. Willows, on the other hand, have a very fibrous root system that binds together and protects gullies from scouring in heavy rain conditions. Choosing between planting poplars and willows and where you plant them will depend on what your objectives are. It could be erosion control, it could be a combination of that with fodder or shelter and shade. So a number of things come into play to make that decision. So what I suggest is you get hold of your regional council staff early in the piece, get a farm plan done and talk about what your objectives are and what you want to achieve. Hi, I'm Peter Manson, and I work with hill country farmers, advising them on tree planting for soil conservation. Here we are at the Greater Wellington Regional Council's Akura Nursery, and this is where poles are distributed for the whole of the Wairarapa region. There are many different varieties of poplars and willows to suit your different situations and the end uses that you need on your farm. The important thing is to get good advice from your nurseryman or land management advisor. I'd like to introduce Paul, who's the manager of the Greater Wellington Regional Council's Akura Nursery. So Paul, I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what makes a good pole.
Yeah, I'd be glad to, Peter. So what we've got here is a 3 metre pole. These are mainly used for cattle, out on cattle country. We have a good base at the 65 millimetres at the bottom to get in through the soil. And here we've got a nice sturdy top around about 45 millimetres. So this one would be perfect to go on cattle country. We'd put a 1.7 Dynex sleeve on it for cattle protection, and how that works is it fits over the pole and the cattle, when they rub against it, the sleeve will just move around the pole and not doing any damage to it.
This looks to be a nice straight pole. How important is that?
The straighter we can get them, the better for the farmer, the better for survival, cartage and everything. So yeah, the premium is to get a nice straight pole.
And also well trimmed in the nursery?
They have to be trimmed. Obviously, if someone's ramming them in or coming down with their hands, you know, they'll start to damage the pole and damage their hands at the same time. So the closer we can get these offshoots to the pole, the better.
You may buy your poles from a private nursery or you may grow your own. But if you buy them from a regional council nursery like this, you'll get the best varieties for your situation, along with the best advice.
As you can see from all of our poles here, they are chisel cut to a point a little bit greater than 45 degrees. We like doing this here as they go into a hole. They are more wind resistant. Hopefully they won't turn in the hole. And this is why we put a chisel cut on them, as you can see like that.
The poplars and willows are all colour coded in the nursery so that out in the field they can be easily identified. In this particular case, this variety is suitable for drier sites, so they can easily be identified and end up on the right site. When thinking about getting the varieties you want for the job you want to complete, it's a really good idea to get a farm plan done by your regional council. Develop that relationship with your land management advisor, get good advice and make sure that you've got a standing order for poles every single year. Alternatively, if you have to make a one-off order, make sure you get that order in nice and early. Hi, I'm Peter Manson. These poles have just been delivered to the farm, and because we're not planting straight away, we're going to store them in the water. And they've been placed in a pond, and this is an ideal situation. Nice clean farm dam water. They shouldn't be stored for more than a few weeks, and they must be planted as soon as possible after arriving on the farm. It's a really good idea to mark the depth for your poles for planting, because not everybody has a pole bar like Adam's got behind him here, and so if you're digging them in, you need to know that they're deep enough. The bottom part of the pole is actually the anchor of the pole. The roots actually grow out very close to the soil surface, so they need to be thumped in nice and deep. And in this case, Adam has marked them around about 800 millimetres from the base. It's a good idea to put the sleeves on before you carry them up the hill for two reasons. One is if it's a windy day, they'll blow away if they're on their own. And the second reason is that for the kind of planting method that Adam is using, the pole bar, you'll see shortly that when he thumps the pole in and the thumper hits the top of the sleeve, he knows that it's fully in the ground. We're looking at gully planting here, and Adam is about to place your poles for best effect to control any potential gully erosion. So he's going to put them generally to the sides, and that is to allow the roots to grow into the gully rather than place a tree in a wet area where the tree will never develop its roots properly and there could be long-term problems. Adam has kept the pole planting site just out of the gully, and he's found a depression where the water will collect and give the pole a much better chance of survival through spring and the dry summer period. He's made the guide hole for the pole with his pole bar, which will make it a lot easier to thump in. He's checking that the pole is upright, and he's almost got the thumper to hit the sleeve. He's just a few centimetres away from it, so that is plenty deep enough for this job. Adam is cultivating the soil around the top side of the pole to help direct any surface runoff into the root zone area of the poplar. Now he's firming it up around the pole itself to make sure that it is a nice tight fit and won't come loose. These poles can still come loose later in summer and still may need more firming up. Cattle like to rub on these poles. If we can apply a Dynex protector, they tend to keep well away. So in this case, and on all farms where possible, we will use this special pole sleeve for protection. This will also deter goats and sheep and most other pests. These sleeves are recyclable, and they peel off as the pole grows down through the zipper, as you can see, and doesn't allow the pole to grow to its full potential. Even if you do have Dynex pole protectors, we still recommend that you keep cattle away from poles for at least 12 months. Where holes are open planted or space planted, using an auger can be a much quicker and more certain method of getting poles established. So we expect very good results from this style of planting. Our recommended method for successful pole planting is using a thumper. However, if you're using an auger, it needs to be a very small drill bit, and in this case it's 60 millimetres diameter, and that gives good contact of the pole with soil all the way down the length of the hole. So what we need to see is that there's a tight fit, and that'll give us successful pole establishment. For successful pole planting, there's three main things to remember. Firstly, choosing the right variety for the job you have at hand. Secondly, choosing the best site for pole survival. And the third thing is to make sure you've used a good planting method. And we've seen all three demonstrated today. Hi, I'm Peter Manson. I've been working with hill country farmers in Hawke's Bay for over 30 years. Poplars and willows are commonly planted on this type of country for soil conservation. And this is an example of one poplar that's been planted on a northwesterly face. It's on a good site, so it's showing good results. It was planted last winter, so just 6 months ago. As the summer progresses and the ground dries out, poles can come loose, and this one is showing a little bit of looseness from the drying out of the ground. Unfortunately, the roots are just quite shallow in the ground and they can break off or dry out. So it's very important to maintain good soil contact with the roots of the tree. One of the methods we use to make sure that happens is to re-ram around the base of the pole. Bruce is going to show us how to re-ram around the base of the pole to get the best results. In this case, Bruce has grabbed a bit of soil from nearby, placed it around the base of the tree. The reason for that is that the ground is so dry that it's very difficult to gather enough in from immediately around the base. He's been very, very careful not to hit the bark of the tree, and he's thumped at a 45-degree angle to make sure that there's less chance of damage. Remember that this should be done in the first year of the pole's growing life. Once the pole is firm and been re-rammed, that's all the maintenance it should need. Hi, I'm Peter Manson. I've been working with hill country farmers for over 30 years in Hawke's Bay. Today we're talking about form pruning poplars, particularly with respect to double leaders. A single-stemmed tree is a healthy tree. It will live longer and stay intact. A second reason for pruning poplars could be to create a better opportunity for pasture growth around the base of the tree, so to throw the shade further out. A third reason would be to give the opportunity to create a straight stem that could one day be turned into a millable log. Bruce has done a perfect job pruning this tree. He has left the main leader, so we'll expect to see a nice straight trunk as the tree continues to grow. This is a tree that was missed in an earlier round of pruning. It should have been done a couple of years ago, but it's not too late, and Bruce is going to show us what to do. In this case, we've chosen to remove the right-hand leader because the left-hand branch is straighter. The reason for doing this job at this time of the year, in other words midsummer to early autumn, is firstly, it's a nice dry time of the year, which means the wound will dry quickly, there'll be less disease. Secondly, the tree is growing quickly, therefore there'll be a quicker occlusion of the wound. And thirdly, there is foliage for livestock to eat. This is a quick, easy job and highly recommended. Hi, my name's Peter Manson. I've been working with hill country farmers in Hawke's Bay for over 30 years. Today we're going to talk about high pruning poplars. This particular poplar here could benefit greatly from pruning and is a really good example. There are three good reasons for pruning poplars. The first would be to create a tree that has a long and stable and healthy life. The second reason is to reduce the amount of shading around the base of the tree, encouraging pasture growth. It also means that stock camps don't occur under the tree and that stock will keep well away from the base and move with the shade as the sun moves around. The third reason is for a tree such as this is nice and accessible. It can be milled for timber at some later stage. It could be used for on-farm use such as fence battens, gates or even railings. Ideally we want to prune poplars while the branches are still small enough to use loppers. In some cases, Bruce will cut the branch a little further out than the base to take the weight off it so it doesn't tear the bark, and then he'll go back and cut it cleanly. Bruce is doing an undercut to ensure that the branch comes off cleanly and doesn't rip the bark down the trunk. Now he's making the main cut, and in this case the branch is too big to use loppers, so he's using a jack saw. There's a range of tools that can be used, and Bruce has shown us the use of both the Bushmate jack saw and the bark hoe, which has got a little more ability to get into the steep angle stem. Two important things. Bruce has firstly tried to get nice clean cuts, both with the jack saw and the loppers. The second thing is to remember to leave nice amount of green crown. After all, the leaf is the engine room of the tree. Bruce has been using an extendable pole saw. The advantage of that is twofold. Firstly, he doesn't need to go up a high ladder, so that reduces some risk. And secondly, this saw has a special blade for undercutting the branch. So he's able to do the work completely from the ground. In summary, we've created a tree with a straight, stable stem, which should promote a long life. We have created a shade-free area to promote pasture. And we've also created a tree that has got potential for timber. Hi, I'm Peter Manson. Today we're going to be talking about high pruning poplars. There are three main reasons why we would prune a poplar. Firstly, to give a strong, stable, healthy tree. The second reason is so that shade moves around with the tree and prevents stock campsites. The third reason is so that we might be able to harvest one day a log for timber. When high pruning poplars, there are three main pole saws you could use. Firstly, we've got the hand saw with a special undercutting blade. We have a battery driven saw with a spare battery, or the more conventional motorised saw. The hand saw is the lightest and cheapest, requires a bit more effort than the other two. This is the battery driven saw. Its features are that it's extendable and it's very quiet. This is the motorised saw. It's more powerful, it's also extendable and very heavy. This is the tree we're going to be pruning today. Ideally we'll prune up to 6 metres. We don't want to prune more than 50% of the foliage because that's the engine room of the tree. One of the most important things to remember is to get a nice clean cut. Late summer is a great time of the year to do the pruning. Firstly, the wounds dry out quickly, and secondly, the tree is still growing, so the wounds will occlude and we won't get regrowth. In this case, we've also got fodder for livestock. We highly recommend pruning poplars. Firstly, to get a strong, healthy, straight stem tree. Secondly, to avoid stock camps. And thirdly, that in years to come, we will have a timber option. Peter Manson, and here we are at Waikoko Station in the Wairarapa. It's typical summer dry, erodible hill country. Peter Gareth here has managed the property for many years and has a long history of planting for soil conservation, shelter, shade and fodder. Peter, Just tell me a little bit about this block. I understand that it's set aside specifically for fodder.
Yes, this is a piece of almost waste land. It's covered in rushes at the bottom of a gully, doesn't grow a hell of a lot. So we decided that we would plant what we call a fodder block in here. These trees are planted specifically for feeding. They have yet to be pollarded for the first time, and we will maintain this as a fodder block.
So Peter, what else can you tell me about this block? For instance, what are the clones of tree you've planted here and how old are they?
Well, our preference is for Tongoya, which is the one that's behind me. They produce more feed and they respond to the cutting a lot quicker than the Matsudana.
And how old are the trees?
The trees here would be 6 years old.
Peter's going to demonstrate pollarding this tree. However, you must remember that safety is paramount. There are two things to think of. One is working from a height, and secondly, working with a chainsaw. When pollarding, you need to be a trained or competent operator of a chainsaw. You must have all the correct safety gear, and preferably have someone with you as a spotter. It's important to remember your safety gear. Peter's wearing steel cap boots, a set of good chaps, a hard hat with visor and earmuffs, and on him he carries a first aid kit. Safety considerations include having a top handled chainsaw with an effective chain brake, a first aid kit with 2 compression bandages, and plenty of hydration. Peter, this is a slightly different situation. We have a tree that hasn't been pollarded before. Tell me about how you're going to go about this job and what you're trying to achieve.
We're looking for those branches that we cut to free fall. Because it hadn't been cut before, it will have a leader in there, which is probably more vertical than some of the others. So working to that point, and so that you actually make a decision on which way it's going to fall and taking your time about that one. But having done this cut, the following cuts will be a lot easier. This one's actually quite a difficult one because it hasn't been done before.
You'll see that Peter always keeps the chainsaw below shoulder height. He cuts away from himself, chooses branches carefully, and the other thing he does is moves the ladder as required. Can you tell me a little bit about the setup here, Peter?
Yeah, my personal way of doing these trees is to have a good ladder, and we're working on a flat surface here, but if we're up on the side of a hill, very important to make sure that that ladder is trodden. The feet are firmly on the ground, so it can't twist if you're leaning one way or the other on the ladder. But it is the whole secret to the safety factor of taking the foliage out of the tree is actually having a stable ladder that you can work off.
This is a high quality feed. It's as good as lucerne hay. And from now on, this tree can be cut every 2 years on this moist site, providing a valuable contribution to this dryland farm. Hi, my name's Peter Manson, and I've been working with hill country farmers in Hawke's Bay for many years. One of those farmers is Dave Reed, and Dave specialises in pollarding willows. Dave, tell me, how long have you been doing that for?
Probably about 15 years, Peter.
And what do you see as the main benefits of growing and pollarding willows?
The main benefits of growing the willows for me is the fodder in a drought, is erosion control and probably shade. And the main reasons for pollarding to manage the size of the tree and produce feed for stock in the dry as we are now. And also in the winter I cut my own poles.
Safety first for pollarding willows. There are 2 main safety issues here. Firstly, working from a height, and secondly, using chainsaws.
The essential thing is to have a centre grip chainsaw.
Right.
That's more balanced if you're holding in one hand. I mean, whenever you use 2 hands is better, but you will be using one hand sometimes.
You must be a competent an experienced chainsaw user to be safe in this operation. Is there anything else, Dave?
Peter, I think really you need to have a protocol, have thought about things, and especially when you're training other people, you need to go through that protocol. You need to revisit it each year because it's something you only do occasionally.
There's some very important personal protective equipment that must be worn on this job. Firstly, steel cap leather boots. Secondly, a quality pair of chaps. And thirdly, a helmet with visor and earmuffs. The first aid kit should be fully equipped. 2 compression bandages, sunscreen, very importantly, water bottle for hydration, fire extinguisher, since we're working in the summer, toolkit for the chainsaw, top handle chainsaw, and a ladder with tethering line. Is there anything else, Dave, that we should consider?
Yes, Peter, it's essential to have a second person on site. Normally there's 2 of us cutting, and if that's not possible, I'll take a non-cutting person as a spotter, and occasionally that person is going to be chasing cows away when they get overzealous.
Dave, obviously you've pollarded this tree before. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've managed this tree to date?
Okay, Peter, when they're young, take out any middle stuff, try and establish a wine glass shape with the branches, and that will produce a safe platform to work on in all subsequent pollardings.
What are the things you need to check out before you start?
Okay, I'm going to look at where I'm going to place my ladder. I'm probably going to take off some of these little bits of rubbish before I put my ladder up. While I'm on the ground, I'm going to look up and see potentially which way the branches are all going to fall. And then when I get my ladder up, I'm going to clean out the inside of the wine glass of all those little tiny twigs that are potentially going to trip you up when you're in there.
Dave uses the chain brake whenever he's moving around the tree. He clips the saw to his belt and uses both hands when climbing. He will make sure he's always got good footholds and he's well balanced in the tree, and he's methodical and steady. The key message is don't rush. You'll notice that Dave's using a top handle forestry saw. In this case, it's an electric saw. Dave cuts some branches high to get better control for felling, and then he'll trim them back to the right level afterwards. Willow fodder is highly nutritious, as good as lucerne hay. Dave says it's a true supplement to summer pasture. When I asked him how much feed he gets from his willows, he said that currently a tree harvested every 5 years can supply enough feed for 10 cows per day. Pollarding is a great way to provide a guaranteed supply of high quality feed for livestock at critical times of the year, such as in dry summers. Those same trees, however, also provide benefits of soil conservation and shade for livestock. Safety is paramount. You must be an experienced chainsaw user and have the appropriate equipment. The other thing is you must have another person on site. Hi, I'm Peter Manson, and I've had 30 odd years experience working with hill country farmers in the Hawke's Bay region. Today we're here to talk about pollarding willows with a difference. And I'd like to introduce Trev Enor and his father Rob, who've got a lot of experience with managing willows. So Trev, I'd like you to tell me a little bit about how long you've been pollarding willows.
I guess my grandfather was pollarding back in the day, but what we've found over the years is easier ways to do it. And so in the last 10 to 15 years, we've been using a system with a bin on the tractor, which gives us easier access.
What are the main benefits of growing and in particular pollarding willows for you?
Well, anyone knows the Hawke's Bay, it gets summer dry quite often. If you've got no grass growing, then you've got a lovely backup in willows, healthy for the sheep, and it saves us a bit of money on buying and supplement feed as well. And it's something we're growing naturally on the farm anyway, around shade and shelter and erosions.
Trev, I understand you work from this box when you're pollarding willows. I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the design and how it's attached to the tractor.
The design wasn't ours. This is just the basic fruit box, like the picking boxes you see all around Hawke's Bay. We've reinforced it with extra half rounds. If you have a look, it's attached to our tractor, and we've just put it on our set of forks. The key to that is obviously safety, and is being able to strap it to the forks with a load binder. If you were silly enough to put it on the forks without a load binder or something very similar to strap it to the tractor, then you're going to have trouble on the till. We've found over the years, in the last 10 or 15 years, that it's so much easier than doing it from the ground or maybe climbing a ladder. So we still use the ladder and into the tree, but we also use this as another great means and a safe way of pollarding.
Trev, what type of country is this system useful for?
Generally speaking, on flat to sort of mild country, you know. You don't want to be taking risks on steep hills. Anything over sort of 25, 30 degrees is crazy.
Too steep, yeah. So flat to easy country is your recommendation?
Yes.
When you're pollarding willows, there are two key risk areas. The first is using a chainsaw, and the second is working from a height. The first thing you really need to be concerned about is being an experienced user of chainsaws. The second thing is to make sure you have the right safety gear. So you'll see that Trev is wearing a pair of steel-capped leather boots. Secondly, a pair of good quality chaps. Thirdly, he'll be wearing a hard hat with a visor and earmuffs. He'll carry a first aid kit with compression pads. A fire extinguisher should always be on site, and if required, a harness. Then we move on to the chainsaw itself. Trev, why do you have more than one chainsaw?
Once you've done a few trees and you're in a box up there cutting, and if you have a saw jam on a branch, then the easiest and safest way is to get another chainsaw revved up and to cut the branch off somewhere else to free that chainsaw up. So
right.
Always two in the box.
Trev, you've got quite a bit of work ahead of you here. You've got some quite tall branches. Can you just tell me how you assess the tree before you begin the job?
We've just got to take safety into account, obviously. First, we have a look at the tree, work out whether there's any wind. Obviously, there's a little bit of a breeze today, so I'm going to work a little bit to the right-hand side of this tree because I can clear some branches there and then work my way to where I want to from there. So I need to clear some branches once I'm up in the box to get a start and then see where we work from there.
Trevor, what age is this tree? How long since it was last pollarded?
Well, this particular tree, or this line of trees that we're going to be dealing with here, were planted very close to 20 years ago. And how often do we pollard it? Well, it's generally around the seasons, and as it works out, it's every sort of 3, 4 or 5 years, depending on the summers, of course. We don't tend to maintain them if we don't need them, because it generally works out we get a summer dry, droughty situation sort of every 3rd or 4th year. So this tree's also probably, this will be its 5th time in this case that it would have been pollarded. And with that becomes succulent branches. If you look at an older willow that hasn't been pollarded, there's less leaves on it, whereas this one has got a lot of nutrients and a lot of goodness in those young leaves.
Trev, what are the most important features to remember to make this a simple and safe operation?
Firstly, we've got to have 2 people. We've got to have one tractor operator and a guy in the box operating the chainsaw. It's a no-brainer really to have a second person around when you're doing chainsaw work, and obviously with the tractor you need 2 people, so that's the first thing.
The height of using your chainsaw, is that a key element for you?
We certainly work towards keeping that chainsaw below shoulder height, and we work on putting the brake on that chainsaw every time we're not using it if we're shifting branches or shifting the tractor around. You may also notice that some of the branches I trim, I cut further out and then come back to clean up afterwards. It's safer doing that. You know, you can get the branch to fall where you want it.
Typically, Trev, we see willow fodder being used for cattle. What's the situation with you?
We predominantly use it on our sheep, our ewes. The sheep will tend to eat all the leaf matter and the very small branches, whereas the difference with cattle grazing, they'll chew up, get into the branches that are even bigger. The bigger sized branches, almost up to the size of your small finger, but if not all of the branch, at least the bark off it. Either sheep or cattle, they love it.
Pollarding is a great way to provide a guaranteed supply of high quality feed at critical times of the year. Those same trees can also provide other benefits such as soil conservation and shade for your livestock. There are some key things to remember, however, around safety. Firstly, you need to be a competent, experienced chainsaw user. Secondly, you need a competent tractor driver and very good communication between the two of you. Here at the Ennals property, we've seen an innovative but well-established alternative approach to harvesting willows. This is a very successful technique. Hi, I'm Peter Manson. Today we're at Waikoko Station in the Wairarapa. It's a typical, erodible, summer dry hill country property. I'd like to introduce Peter Garworth, who has a long history of planting for soil conservation, shelter, fodder and shade. So Peter, can you tell me a little bit about the trees right here? When did you plant them and for what reason?
They were planted about 20 years ago as part of the farm plan. This paddock, we endeavoured to cover the whole paddock with trees, and we used a mixture of poplars and willows, and the willows have actually proved quite valuable as a fodder source over the times that we've had severe droughts. The tree behind us has been cut at least 3 times, but the growth on it now would suggest that it's probably 6-7 years since it was last cut.
So this is a much longer period than normal between cuts.
It is, yeah, and you can see why. It's in a difficult position. It's not the easiest tree to do, so we've walked past it a few times and cut the easy ones.
So Peter, what time of the year do you harvest these trees?
It can be any time that we actually need feed and the trees are in leaf. We've used those trees when we put the bull to the cow in December, right through to feeding sheep and cattle in the late autumn. So it's when we need the feed, it's sitting up on the tree, ready to use whenever we need it.
So how do you know how much to feed?
We used to work on a principle on grazing sheep on crop for half an hour for maintenance. The sheep or the cattle be fully feeding for half an hour, and then there's still a bit of residues left after that.
When pollarding, there are 2 main dangers. The first is working from a height, and the second is use of chainsaws. It's important to remember your safety gear. Peter's wearing steel-cap boots, a set of good chaps, a hard hat with visor and earmuffs, and on him he carries a first aid kit. Safety considerations include having a top-handled chainsaw with an effective chain brake, a first aid kit with 2 compression bandages, and plenty of hydration. When pollarding, you need to be a trained or competent operator of a chainsaw. You must have all the correct safety gear and preferably have someone with you as a spotter. We're about to pollard an older willow tree. So Peter, tell me how you would approach this tree and the things that we have to remember.
Well, you can see that we've got the ladder in there, and I think getting a good placement for the ladder is the most important thing. So we've cut a wee bit into the tree so that we can get the head of the ladder up into the tree and it's tied off. And the bottom of the ladder is firmly planted so that when I'm up the ladder I feel quite stable. And then we start to approach how we're going to cut each particular limb out of the tree.
Okay, so then exactly how are you going to approach it once you're up the ladder?
Well, I think first is to take a bit of time to work it out. Because really you want each limb on a free fall, you don't want it getting tangled in another limb. And so it's a case of going around the tree. We may have to shift the ladder a number of times, but making sure that we don't get a tangle, because tangle puts stress on the branch you haven't cut, and when you do cut it, you could get a kickback or jam the blade.
Peter, what should the end result look like?
The end result for the way I would cut this tree would be that there'll be a stub on each of the branches that we've cut. Leaving a wee stub means that we'll get finer branching coming away from the stub of each of those branches, so we get more multiple shoots, so we'll actually end up with more feed growing back on the tree.
Willow fodder has a similar value to lucerne hay. Ewes can eat stems down to about 5mm diameter, whereas cattle can chew branches up to about 10mm diameter. This job looks easy when done by a professional, but there are some things to remember. Firstly, never use the chainsaw above shoulder height. Secondly, be very careful about selecting branches. Watch out for tensions, which way they're leaning, and if there's a problem, get down from the tree, step back and reassess.